The stars looked the same as they always did, but Captain Jake Morrison knew this trip would change everything. He stood on the bridge of the USS Phoenix, watching the endless black space filled with tiny lights. His ship was not the biggest or the strongest in the human fleet, but it was his home, and he loved every bolt and wire in her hull. "Captain, we're 3 hours out from the meeting point," said Lisa Grant, his first officer. She had been with him for 5 years and knew him better than anyone else on the ship. Lisa could tell when he was worried, even when he kept smiling. Jake turned to look at her, and his face lit up with that famous grin that everyone on the ship knew so well. 3 hours until we make history, Lisa. How does that feel?" "Scary," she said with a small laugh. "But good scary, if that makes sense." Jake nodded and looked around the bridge at his crew. Tony Rodriguez sat at the communication station, his fingers dancing over the controls as he monitored alien signals. Amy Brooks stood near the tactical display, her sharp eyes watching for any signs of trouble. These people had followed him across the galaxy, and he trusted them with his life. The Phoenix was carrying more than just crew members on this mission. They had diplomats, scientists, and cultural experts all hoping to make a good first impression on the Zephyrians. This would be the first time humans had ever met this alien race face to face. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most advanced species anyone had ever encountered. "Rodriguez, anything new from our alien friends?" Jake asked, walking over to the communication station. Tony looked up from his screens and shook his head. "Same as before, Captain. Very formal transmissions. Lots of technical data about meeting. Procedures. They don't seem like the chatty type. Maybe they're just nervous too," Jake said with another smile. "First meetings are always awkward, even when both sides are human." Amy Brooks walked over from her station, carrying a datapad filled with intelligence reports. "Captain, I've been reading everything we know about the Zephyrians. They're supposed to be completely logical beings. No emotions, no humor. Everything based on pure reason and facts." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sounds pretty boring if you ask me. Good thing we're here to liven things up a bit." The crew laughed at their captain's joke, but Amy looked worried. "Sir, maybe we should be more careful about how we act around them. If they don't understand human emotions, they might misinterpret things." "Brooks, relax," Jake said, putting a friendly hand on her shoulder. "We're going there to build bridges, not walls. The best way to do that is to be ourselves. If they want to understand humans, they need to see what we're really like." Lisa Grant checked her watch and announced to the bridge crew that they would be arriving at the meeting point in 2 hours. The Phoenix would dock at Kepler Station, a neutral space station orbiting the Zephyrian home world. The station had been built specifically for meetings between different alien races. Jake walked to his captain's chair and sat down, still wearing that confident smile that had become his trademark. His crew had been joking about it for years. No matter how dangerous the situation got, no matter how scared everyone else might be, Captain Morrison always found a reason to smile. "You know what I think?" Jake said to no one in particular. "I think this is going to be the start of something amazing. Humans and Zephyrians working together, sharing knowledge, maybe even becoming friends." Tony Rodriguez spun around in his chair to face the captain. "Sir, do you really think that's possible? Everything we've heard says they're completely different from us." "Different doesn't mean bad, Rodriguez," Jake replied. "Maybe they'll teach us something about logic and efficiency. Maybe we'll teach them something about creativity and joy. That's how progress happens." The bridge fell quiet as everyone thought about their captain's words. Outside the main view screen, space looked peaceful and calm. But somewhere out there, alien minds were thinking alien thoughts and making alien plans, unknown to the human crew. Zephyrian observation ships had been watching the Phoenix for hours. High Analyst Kexthara sat in the command center of one of these ships, studying video feeds of the human bridge. The aliens had been recording every human gesture and expression, trying to understand what they might mean. The human leader continues to display aggressive facial expressions, Kexthara reported to his superiors. His teeth are frequently exposed in what our xenobiology experts believe may be a threat display. Other Zephyrian analysts nodded in agreement as they watched Jake Morrison smile and laugh with his crew. To their alien minds, these expressions looked dangerous and unpredictable. They had never seen anything like human emotions before, and they did not know how to interpret them. Back on the Phoenix, Jake stood up from his chair and walked around the bridge, checking on each of his crew members. This was something he did before every important mission. He wanted to make sure everyone was ready and confident. "Brooks, are our security teams prepared?" he asked. "Yes, sir, though I hope we won't need them," Amy replied. "This is supposed to be a peaceful meeting." "Grant, how are our diplomatic guests doing?" "A little nervous, but excited," Lisa answered. "Ben Phillips has been practicing his opening speech for hours. Kate Sullivan is going over her scientific presentation one more time." Jake nodded with satisfaction. Ben Phillips was their cultural attaché, a man who had spent years studying alien civilizations. Kate Sullivan was their chief science officer, brilliant and eager to share human discoveries with the Zephyrians. Captain Tony Rodriguez called out from his station. "I'm getting a transmission from Kepler Station. They're ready to receive us." "Excellent," Jake said, returning to his captain's chair. "Grant, take us in. Nice and smooth. We want to make a good impression." As the Phoenix moved toward the meeting point, Jake felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. This was what he had joined Starfleet for. Moments like this, when humanity reached out to touch the stars and maybe find friends among them. He smiled again, not knowing that somewhere in the darkness, alien eyes were watching that smile and seeing something very different from what he intended. The Zephyrian saw aggression where he meant friendship, threat where he meant welcome, danger where he meant hope. The stage was set for a meeting that would change everything, though not in the way anyone expected. Kepler Station was bigger than anything Jake Morrison had ever seen. The massive structure floated in space like a metal city, its silver walls reflecting the light from the nearby star. Docking bays lined the outer ring, each one large enough to hold 3 ships the size of the Phoenix. "My God," whispered Lisa Grant as she stared at the view screen. "How did they build something this huge?" Jake stood beside her, his usual smile growing even wider. "That's what we're here to find out, isn't it? Maybe they'll teach us their secrets." The Phoenix moved slowly toward the assigned docking bay, following the precise instructions sent by station control. Tony Rodriguez listened carefully to the alien voices giving them directions. The Zephyrian language sounded cold and mechanical to human ears, but the translation computers made everything clear. "Docking complete, Captain," announced the helmsman. "All systems show green." Jake turned to face his diplomatic team. Ben Phillips stood nearby wearing his best dress uniform, holding a datapad with his carefully prepared opening speech. Kate Sullivan checked her scientific equipment one last time, making sure everything was ready for the presentations they had planned. "Remember, everyone," Jake said to the group, "we're not just representing ourselves today. We're representing all of humanity. Let's show them what we're made of." The airlock cycled open, and the human delegation stepped onto Kepler Station. The corridors were wide and clean, with smooth walls that seemed to glow with their own light. Everything was designed for beings much taller than humans, making Jake and his team feel small as they walked toward the meeting chamber. Zephyrian guides met them at the entrance to the diplomatic section. These aliens were exactly as described in the intelligence reports. tall and thin with pale gray skin and large dark eyes that seemed to look right through you. They wore simple robes and moved with precise, calculated steps. "Welcome to Kepler Station," said the lead guide through. "A translation device. I am designated as Guide Unit 7. You will follow established protocols for this diplomatic encounter." Jake stepped forward with his most welcoming smile. "Thank you for having us. I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Phoenix. We're honored to be here." The Zephyrian guide stared at Jake for a long moment, its large eyes fixed on his face. Jake noticed the alien's posture stiffened slightly, but he assumed it was just nervous about the historic meeting. They walked through more corridors until they reached a large chamber with an oval table in the center. The room was filled with soft blue light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Several Zephyrians were already seated at the far end of the table, their dark eyes watching every move the humans made. "Please be seated, Guide," Unit 7 instructed, gesturing toward chairs that had been specially made for human-sized Jake and his team took their places across from the Zephyrian delegation. The alien leader was introduced as High Analyst Kexthara, a being whose title suggested great importance in Zephyrian society. Beside him sat Military Commander Vex Nori and several other officials whose names were long strings of sounds that human throats could barely pronounce. "We begin this encounter with formal recognition protocols," High Analyst Kexthara announced in a voice that carried no emotion at all. "The Zephyrian Collective acknowledges the presence of human representatives." "Ben." Phillips looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. The cultural attaché stood up and began his prepared speech. "On behalf of humanity and the United Earth Government, we thank you for this opportunity to meet. We come in peace, seeking friendship and mutual understanding between our peoples." Jake watched the Zephyrians carefully as Ben spoke. Their faces showed no reaction at all, which he found a bit unsettling. But he kept his own expression warm and friendly, smiling whenever he caught one of their eyes. What Jake did not know was that every smile made the Zephyrians more convinced that he was displaying aggressive behavior. In their species, showing teeth was something only done before an attack. High Analyst Kexthara made mental notes about the human leader's frequent threat displays and erratic emotional states. Kate Sullivan was next to speak, presenting some of humanity's scientific achievements. She talked about human medicine, space travel technology, and cultural developments. Her voice was excited and enthusiastic as she described the wonders of human civilization. "We believe that sharing knowledge benefits everyone," Kate concluded. "What we learn from each other will make both our species stronger." Jake stood up when Kate finished, his face beaming with pride for his crew and his species. "I couldn't have said it better myself. Humans have always been explorers and builders. We want to explore the galaxy alongside friends like you." The Zephyrians exchanged glances that humans could not interpret. To them, Jake's animated gestures and constant smiling looked like barely controlled aggression. Military Commander Vex Nori leaned closer to High Analyst Kexthara and whispered something in their native language. "We will consider your proposals," High Analyst Kexthara said after a long pause. "The Zephyrian Collective requires extensive analysis before making decisions about future interactions." Jake's smile never wavered. "Of course, take all the time you need. These are big decisions for both our peoples. Maybe while you're thinking it over, we could arrange some informal meetings? Get to know each other better as individuals?" More whispered conversations passed between the Zephyrians. Jake interpreted their quiet discussion as thoughtful consideration of his suggestion. In reality, they were debating whether his proposal for informal meetings was part of some elaborate military strategy. "That may be possible, High Analyst," Kexthara replied carefully. "We will transmit scheduling parameters to your vessel." The formal meeting lasted another hour. with both sides exchanging basic information about their governments, territories, and capabilities. Jake remained cheerful and optimistic throughout, cracking small jokes and making friendly comments that he thought would help break the ice. Lisa Grant noticed that the Zephyrians seemed to grow more rigid with each passing minute, but she attributed it to cultural differences. Aliens who lived by pure logic probably needed time to warm up to human friendliness. When the meeting finally ended, Jake stood up and extended his hand toward High Analyst Kexthara. "Thank you for this historic day. I look forward to working with you in the future." The Zephyrian leader looked at Jake's outstretched hand for several seconds before carefully touching it with one thin finger. The brief contact felt cold and strange to Jake, but he maintained his warm smile throughout the awkward handshake dot as the human delegation walked back through the station corridors. Jake felt pleased with how things had gone. "I think that went pretty well," he told his team. "They seemed interested in everything we had to say." Ben Phillips nodded in agreement. "Very formal, but that's probably just their way. Once they get to know us better, I'm sure they'll warm up." None of them realized that their warm humanity was being interpreted as cold calculation by alien minds that had never encountered genuine emotion before. The stage was set for a misunderstanding that would have consequences none of them could imagine. 3 days passed since the first meeting, and Jake Morrison felt better about the mission with each passing hour. He walked through the corridors of the Phoenix with that same easy smile, stopping to chat with crew members and checking on the various departments. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. "Captain, we've received another transmission from the Zephyrians," Tony Rodriguez called out as Jake entered the bridge. "They want to schedule a follow-up meeting for tomorrow." Jake's grin widened as he took his place in the captain's chair. "Excellent news. See, I told you they were just being cautious. Now they're ready to get down to real business." Lisa Grant looked up from her station, where she had been reviewing supply reports. "What kind of meeting are they proposing this time?" "Technical discussions," Tony replied, reading from his screen. "They want to exchange information about our respective technologies and capabilities." Jake rubbed his hands together with enthusiasm. "Perfect. Kate will love this. Where is our chief science officer anyway?" "In the lab with Dan Parker," Amy Brooks answered from her security station. "They've been working around the clock to prepare demonstration materials for the next meeting." Jake stood up and headed toward the door. "I think I'll go check on their progress. This could be the breakthrough we've been hoping for." He found Kate Sullivan and Dan Parker in the main science lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing various human technologies. Kate was explaining the principles behind human faster-than-light travel, while Dan worked on a portable fusion reactor that they planned to demonstrate. "How's it going in here?" Jake asked, his presence immediately brightening the mood in the mood. Lab.Kate looked up from her work with excitement in her eyes. "Captain, this is incredible. If we can share our technology with the Zephyrians and learn from theirs, we could advance human science by centuries in just a few years." Dan Parker wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled at his captain. Fusion reactor is ready for demonstration, sir. It's a scaled-down version, but it should show them how our power systems work." Jake clapped both of them on the shoulders. "Outstanding work, both of you. The Zephyrians are going to be impressed." What Jake did not know was that every human transmission was being carefully analyzed by Zephyrian intelligence specialists. In a secure facility on their home world, teams of analysts studied recordings of Jake's conversations, his facial expressions, and his body language. High Analyst Kexthara stood before a large screen showing freeze frames of Jake Morrison's smiling face. "Observe the consistent threat displays exhibited by the human leader," he told his assembled staff. "Note the frequency and intensity of these aggressive expressions." Military Commander Vex Nori pointed to another screen showing Kate Sullivan's enthusiastic presentation. The female demonstrates similar behavior patterns when discussing their weapons technology. This suggests coordinated psychological warfare tactics. "Sir," interrupted a junior analyst, "our translation systems indicate that humans refer to these facial expressions as smiling and consider them signs of friendliness." Kexthara's large dark eyes fixed on the young analyst. "Deception is a common warfare strategy. These creatures have a documented history of violence and conquest on their home world. We must not be fooled by their claims of peaceful intentions." Back on the Phoenix, Jake decided to record a personal message to send to the Zephyrian leadership. He thought a more informal approach might help establish better relations between their species. He sat in his ready room, looking directly into the camera with his warmest smile. "Greetings to High Analyst Kexthara and his Zephyrian collective. I wanted to take a moment to speak to you directly, leader to leader." Jake leaned forward, his expression open and sincere. "I know our peoples are very different, but I believe we have more in common than we realize. We both love our families. We both want to explore the universe, and we both hope for a better future for our children." He chuckled softly, thinking about his own daughter back on Earth. "I have a little girl who's probably wondering why Daddy is so far away from home. But I'm here because I believe that what we do today will make the galaxy a safer, more wonderful place for her to grow up in." Jake's smile grew even brighter as he continued. "I hope that someday soon, human children and Zephyrian children will learn about each other in school. Maybe they'll even become friends and work together to solve problems that neither of our species could handle alone." The message was transmitted to Kepler Station and forwarded to the Zephyrian home world within hours. When Kexthara and his team analyzed it, they saw something completely different from what Jake intended. "The human leader speaks of offspring," Vex Nori observed. "This suggests breeding programs designed to create hybrid warriors for future conflicts. Note his increased agitation when discussing his progeny," Kexthara added. "The threat displays become more pronounced, indicating elevated aggression levels." Another analyst pointed to Jake's gestures. "The forward-leaning posture and direct eye contact are consistent with intimidation tactics used by predatory species." The Zephyrian High Council was convened in emergency session to discuss the human threat. Representatives from across their civilization gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, a massive chamber carved from a single crystal that amplified their collective thoughts. "The evidence is clear," Kexthara reported to the assembled leaders. "These humans present an immediate danger to our civilization. Their leader displays constant aggression. Their technology presentations focus on weapon systems, and their talk of children suggests long-term conquest plans." Elder Zixmari, one of the oldest and most respected members of the council, asked the crucial question. "What do you recommend, High Analyst?" "Preemptive action," Kexthara replied without hesitation. "We must strike before they can implement whatever attack they are planning." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Zephyrians had built their civilization on logical analysis and careful planning. When their best analysts all agreed that humans posed a threat, the decision seemed obvious. "Authorization granted," Elder Zixmari announced. "Military Commander Vex Nori, prepare the fleet for immediate deployment." Meanwhile, Jake Morrison continued his daily routine aboard the Phoenix, completely unaware that his friendly gestures had been interpreted as declarations of war. He visited the ship's recreation areas, where crew members were playing games and relaxing between shifts. "Captain," called out Carol Hayes from across the recreation room, "come settle an argument for us. Steve Chun thinks the Zephyrians will want to establish trade routes within a year. I think it'll take at least 3 years before they trust us enough for major commercial ventures." Jake walked over to join the discussion, his smile lighting up the room. I'm with Steve on this one, Carol. I think they're more ready than we realize. Sometimes all it takes is one good conversation to turn strangers into friends. The crew laughed at their captain's optimism, but they also drew strength from it. If Jake Morrison believed everything would work out, then maybe it really would. Outside the ship, Zephyrian warships were already moving into position, their advanced cloaking systems hiding them from human sensors. 12 of the most powerful vessels in their fleet surrounded Kepler Station, waiting for the order to attack. The trap was set, and the humans had no idea what was coming. Jake Morrison was reviewing the final preparations for the morning meeting when the first plasma bolt struck the Phoenix. The ship shuddered violently, throwing him against the wall of his ready room as emergency alarms began screaming throughout. The vessel. He pulled himself to his feet and ran toward the bridge, his mind struggling to understand what was happening. The corridor lights flickered as another massive impact rocked the ship, and he could hear the sound of bulkheads groaning under stress. "Report!" Jake shouted as he burst onto the bridge, his usual smile completely gone for the first time in years. Lisa Grant was already at her station, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to assess the damage. 12 Zephyrian warships just decloaked around us, Captain. They opened fire without warning. Amy Brooks looked up from the tactical display, her face pale with shock. "The USS Denver is gone, sir. Direct hit to their main reactor. No survivors." Jake felt his heart stop as he processed the words. 43 good people, dead in an instant. The Denver had been one of their escort ships, filled with crew members he had known personally. What about the Atlantic? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Badly damaged, but still fighting," Amy replied. "Captain Rogers is trying to reach us on emergency channels." Jake dropped into his command chair and stared at the main view screen, where the sleek forms of Zephyrian warships moved through space like deadly sharks. Their weapons glowed with alien energy as they prepared to fire again. "This has to be a mistake," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're here for peace talks." Why would they attack us? Tony Rodriguez was frantically working at his communications station, trying to establish contact with the attacking fleet. "I'm broadcasting on all frequencies, Captain, but they're not responding to our surrender signals." Jake stood up slowly, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a crushing burden. For the first time in his career, his optimism and confidence had failed him completely. He had led his people into a trap without even realizing it. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's intercom system. "We are under attack by Zephyrian forces. This is not a drill. All crew members report to emergency stations immediately." Another plasma blast hit the Phoenix, this time penetrating the outer hull near the engine room. The lights went out for several seconds before emergency power kicked in, bathing the bridge in an eerie red glow. Dan Parker's voice crackled over the communication system from engineering. "Captain, we've lost main power to decks 7 through 9. I'm trying to reroute everything through auxiliary systems, but we're not going to last much longer under this kind of punishment." Jake turned to Amy Brooks, his tactical officer. "Can we fight back?" Amy shook her head grimly. "Our weapons are no match for their technology, sir. Their shields are deflecting everything we throw at them, while their plasma cannons are cutting through our defenses like paper." The captain looked around his bridge at the crew members who had followed him across the galaxy. These people trusted him to keep them safe, and he had failed them all. His famous smile had somehow become a death sentence for everyone under his command. "Rodriguez, keep trying to establish communications," Jake ordered. "There has to be some way to make them. Understand, this is all a misunderstanding." Tony worked desperately at his station, sending message after message on every frequency the humans knew. "I'm telling them we surrender, that we came here in peace, that we want to talk. Nothing is getting through, Captain." On the Zephyrian flagship, High Analyst Kexthara watched the battle through tactical displays that showed every human ship and weapon. Military Commander Vexnori stood beside him, coordinating the attack with cold precision. The humans are broadcasting what they claim are surrender signals, Vexnori reported. Our analysts believe this is another deception tactic designed to make us lower our guard. Kexthara nodded, his large dark eyes fixed on the image of the Phoenix as it struggled to survive under concentrated fire. Continue the assault. Their leaders' psychological warfare techniques are more sophisticated than we anticipated, but we will not be fooled. Back on the Phoenix, Jake Morrison was recording what he knew would be his final message. He sat in his damaged-ready room, looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness and regret. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Phoenix," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "If anyone receives this message, I want them to know that what happened here today was not an act of war, but a tragic failure of communication between our species." The ship shook again as another plasma bolt found its target, and Jake had to grab his desk to keep from falling over. "The Zephyrians attacked us because they misunderstood our intentions. My smiles, my attempts at friendship, my efforts to build bridges between our peoples, somehow they interpreted all of this as aggression." Jake paused as he heard explosions echoing through the ship's corridors. His crew was fighting bravely, but everyone knew the battle was already lost. "I don't blame them for defending themselves against what they thought was a threat," Jake continued. "But I need humanity to understand that this was never supposed to happen. We came here with open hearts and peaceful intentions, and somehow that very humanity became our downfall." Carol Hayes' voice came over the intercom from the medical bay. "Captain, I have wounded coming in from all decks. Life support is failing in sections 4 and 5. Jake could hear the pain in her voice as she worked to save lives that probably could not be saved. Throughout the ship, his crew members were doing their jobs with the same dedication they had always shown, even though they knew they were going to die. "To my crew," Jake said, looking directly into the camera, "you are the finest people I have ever known. You followed me into the unknown because you believed in the dream of peace among the stars. That dream is not dead, even if we are." Steve Chun called out from the navigation station. "Captain, the Atlantic just lost main power. Captain Rogers is requesting permission to abandon ship." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every life that had been lost under his command. When he opened them again, there was a strange peace in his expression. "Tell Rogers to get his people to the escape pods," Jake ordered, "and prepare our own evacuation procedures." But even as he gave the order, Jake knew that most of them would not make it out alive. The Zephyrian ships were targeting anything that moved, including escape pods and lifeboats. The Phoenix shuddered one final time as a massive plasma blast tore through her hull, and Jake Morrison's smile was gone forever. The Phoenix died in silence, her hull torn apart by plasma fire, until nothing remained but scattered debris floating in the cold darkness of space. The USS Atlantic followed minutes later, her escape pods destroyed before they could reach safety. In 18 minutes, the entire human diplomatic mission was gone. High Analyst Kexthara watched the final moments from his command ship, satisfied that the threat had been eliminated. The human vessels had been completely destroyed, their aggressive leader and his crew no longer able to carry out whatever attack they had been planning. "Scan for survivors," Military Commander Vexnori ordered, though both aliens knew there would be none. Their weapons had been thorough and precise. "No life signs detected," reported the scanning officer. "All human vessels have been destroyed." Kexthara nodded with cold satisfaction. The preemptive strike was successful. "These humans will not threaten our civilization." But something had escaped the destruction. A small probe launched from the Phoenix in her final moments drifted away from the battle, carrying Jake Morrison's last message toward the edge of the solar system. The probe was too small for the Zephyrian sensors to detect, and it disappeared into the vast emptiness between the stars. 3 months passed before the probe reached a human listening post on the outer rim of Earth's territory. The message it carried traveled through communication networks until it reached Earth itself, where government officials and military leaders gathered to watch Captain Jake Morrison's final words. The recording showed Jake sitting in his damaged ready room, explosions echoing in the background as he spoke directly to the camera. His face, once known for its constant smile, was filled with sadness and understanding. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Phoenix," his voice said from speakers in the emergency session of the Earth Council. "If anyone receives this message, I want them to know that what happened here today was not an act of war, but a tragic failure of communication between our species." The room fell silent as Earth's leaders listened to the dead captain explain how human friendship had been mistaken for aggression. Jake's words painted a picture of aliens so different from humanity that they could not recognize joy, warmth, or hope when they saw it. Admiral Sarah Kim, head of Earth's space fleet, wiped tears from her eyes as the message ended. "We have to tell the families," she said quietly. "They deserve to know what really happened to their loved ones." The news spread across Earth and the human colonies like wildfire. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew had died not in battle, but because their very humanity had been seen as a threat. The story captured the imagination of billions of people who struggled to understand how kindness could be mistaken for evil. Memorial services were held on every human world. Jake Morrison became a symbol of everything good about humanity: the willingness to reach out to strangers, the hope for a better future, the belief that understanding could overcome fear. His smile, once the source of so much trouble, became an icon of human courage. The galactic community reacted with shock when the true story became known. Other alien species who had dealt with the Zephyrians came forward with their own stories of misunderstandings and near conflicts. A pattern emerged of a civilization so rigid in its thinking that it could not adapt to new ideas or different ways of being. The Corvan Republic, a peaceful trading confederation, revealed that they had nearly gone to war with the Zephyrians over a similar misunderstanding 20 years earlier. Only quick diplomatic work had prevented bloodshed. The Altarian Empire shared recordings of Zephyrian officials interpreting their cultural greeting ceremonies as military displays. The Zephyrians had demanded an apology for what they saw as aggressive behavior, not understanding that the Altarians were trying to show respect. As these stories spread, the Zephyrian collective found itself increasingly isolated. Trade agreements were canceled, diplomatic relations were severed, and other species began to avoid Zephyrian space entirely. The very logic and analysis they prided themselves on had led them to destroy innocent people and ruin their reputation across the galaxy. Analyst Kekstara was removed from his position and sent to a remote research facility to study the implications of what had happened. For the first time in his life, he began to question whether pure logic was enough to understand the universe around him. On Earth, Jake Morrison's daughter grew up hearing stories about her father's final mission. Emma Morrison was only 8 years old when he died, but she remembered his smile and his belief that the galaxy could be a better place if people just tried to understand each other. As Emma grew older, she decided to follow in her father's footsteps. She studied alien cultures and languages, determined to prevent the kind of tragedy that had taken her father's life. Her goal was to become a diplomat who could bridge the gaps between different species. 5 years after the Phoenix was destroyed, Emma Morrison graduated from the academy and was assigned to humanity's new diplomatic corps. The corps had been created specifically to prevent misunderstandings like the one that had killed her. Father and his crew. The first lesson taught to every new diplomat was about Captain Jake Morrison and his smile. Students learned how facial expressions, body language, and even tone of voice could mean completely different things to different species. They studied dozens of first contact scenarios, learning to recognize when communication was breaking down before it led to violence. Emma stood before her first class of diplomatic trainees, wearing her father's smile as she explained the importance of their mission. My father believed that understanding between species was possible, she told them. He died because that understanding failed, but his sacrifice taught us how to do better. She walked to the front of the classroom and activated a holographic display, showing various alien species and their communication methods. Every gesture you make, every word you say, every expression on your face will be interpreted by alien minds that may see things completely differently than you do. One of the students raised his hand. How do we make sure we don't make the same mistakes Captain Morrison made? Emma smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father. We learn, we listen, and we never stop trying to build bridges. But most importantly, we never let fear of misunderstanding stop us from being human. The new diplomatic course carried Jake Morrison's message to the stars. They approached each new species with caution, but also with hope, armed with better knowledge and communication tools. They made mistakes, but they learned from them instead of dying from them. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species began to understand that the strange, emotional humans were not a threat to be feared, but friends to be welcomed. Jake Morrison's smile lived on in every successful first contact, every peaceful trade agreement, and every moment when understanding triumphed over fear. The captain who died for his smile had become the reason that humanity would never stop smiling at the stars.